Hello, this is Christopher Ruspe. I'm a chartered market technician and a certified financial planner who specializes in comprehensive financial planning. And today we're going to talk about the debt ceiling, which has been in the news this week. Now, the first thing I want to tell you is nothing that I say is meant to support one party over another, and nothing that I say is meant to be a political comment. I like to talk about these types of things as facts, not opinions, and not as endorsements or criticisms. So what is the debt ceiling? Well, right now the U.S. government spends more than it makes. So imagine for a minute that you make $100,000 a year and you're spending $120,000 a year. So that $20,000 that you're spending is going to come in the form of taking on more debt. Maybe you would borrow to buy a car, maybe you would borrow on credit cards, or maybe you would borrow for a house. But right now the United States is spending more than it makes, and as that adds up through the years, we accumulate an ever larger amount of debt. Right now our current national debt is about $30 trillion. Now, that's about 1.5 times roughly our GDP, our economy. And so when you look at the amount of debt that a country has, it's really, really important to take into consideration how much debt relative to their national economic output, which is the GDP. So the reason the debt ceiling has to be raised is because we don't have enough revenues coming in to make all of our obligations, pay all of our obligations. We don't have enough to come in to pay Social Security, fund our defense budget, and also pay the interest on the existing $30 trillion worth of debt. So we have to borrow more in order to make those payments. So let me give you an example of how that would look in your own life. Imagine for a minute that you had a $10,000 balance on a credit card. And the credit card came in and they said you have a $500 minimum payment. Now, as you and I both know, that $500 minimum payment, if you make that minimum payment on a credit card, it's something like a 30-year loan. It takes forever if you're making minimum payments to pay it off. But let's just say the minimum payment in this case would be about $500. Imagine if you went back to that credit card company and said, hey, I am going to pay you that $500. I just need you to make my credit card balance $11,000. I need you to let me borrow, instead of a max of $10,000, I need you to let me borrow $11,000, and then I'll give you $500 of that. That really is how ridiculous our government is conducting itself right now. But the debt ceiling, we don't have a lot of choice, because if the debt ceiling isn't increased, then we can't make our payments as they exist. It would lead to a default, a downgrade of the country's debt, which means that we have to pay more interest to borrow, and it would probably cause the global financial markets to collapse. So it's really a catch-22. What's the solution? Well, the solution is you got to stop spending more than you make. And we've been doing this since 1980 to a large degree, pretty much every single year. And for those of us who don't believe in that type of a policy, it's getting to be an ever larger number. Now, here's an interesting fact. If you go back and you look at when Europe collapsed economically, that was, I guess, about 15, 16 years ago. If you look at the debt level that the main culprits had relative to the size of their economies, okay, what you will find is that the countries that had the biggest problems were the ones that had the highest debt as a percentage of their annual GDP. So Italy, Greece, and Spain, they had a very high amount of debt based on the size of their GDP, their gross domestic product, which is nothing more than the sum of all of the economic output of a country. And somewhere around 150% seemed to be about the magic number. When the countries in Europe hit that level, that's when the bubble burst in the Eurozone about 15, 16 years ago. So, having said that, we're at about 150%. Obviously, United States is different than Italy, different than Greece, different than Spain. But if these debt levels continue to go up, eventually it's hard to imagine that they won't cause some sort of catastrophe. So now you know a little bit more about the debt level. As far as where we're going to be in the next 2 weeks, anything's possible, but most likely the debt ceiling has to be increased just for us to continue to make these interest payments. And eventually, hopefully, enough voters will demand that the government doesn't spend money it doesn't have unless it's in case of a war. Because when you spend more than you make, eventually you go broke. And that's a rule and a law that you can't get around, even if you're the United States. So if you like this type of content, make sure you subscribe and like this video and send it out to people that you know. And I'll be coming up with some more video content this upcoming week. Have a good weekend, and I'll talk to you then.